Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for being here today. It's our great joy as we get to say welcome home to Bishop Taylor, our most recent former bishop here in the Diocese of Western North Carolina. And what that means for some of you who don't know is that Bishop Taylor grew up here at Trinity Church. So thank you for being with us today.
So, Scott, thank you for inviting me, it's always wonderful to be here. I want to say at the output that, of course, I'd like to sell books, but honestly, it doesn't really matter if you buy the books. What I really want to do is to give you a sense of another layer of ordained person, particularly being a bishop in the church. And I want to say at the very beginning, the only person I criticized in this book, except for Bob Duncan, is myself. So this is not a mommy dearest book. This is, let me tell you my story, and I will tell you as much as I can about things about being a bishop that you wouldn't know. I also want to add that I had this book vetted by Michael Curry, Catherine Jefferts Schori, and the Chancellor of the church. A, I didn't want to get sued, and B, I wanted to make sure that, again, that I wasn't somehow holding someone up as being a villain or anything less than holy. So the other thing is, I would never have written this book if it hadn't been for the great Smoky Writers Group. Tommy Hayes, I took classes with Tommy for about 3 years. I took classes with Elizabeth Ludens for about 3 years. And the way this book got written was every third week I had to write 20 pages. So I'm really indebted to them. I wrote it because it's that Alice in Wonderland thing. How do I know what I think until I see what I say? So in order to understand it, I had to write it. And the more I wrote, the more I came to remember things that I'd forgotten about being a bishop. The other thing I just want to say, as much as I talk about how difficult I found the job, and I want to say I found the job that difficult. I had talents that were suited to be in the episcopacy, and I had other parts of myself that were just not a great fit. But I want to say what an honor it was. So I got to meet the Queen of England. We didn't have a long conversation, but I got to meet her. I traveled all over the United States. American Airlines used to love me. They could hear less about me. I went to India, I went to Ecuador, I went to Scotland, I went to England, I went to Ireland, I went to Puerto Rico, I went to Taiwan. I went to all the borders of the United States. I got to be part of the General Convention that voted for Gene Robinson. I got to be part of the General Convention that voted for Catherine Jefferts Schori. I got to be part of the General Convention that voted for Michael Curry. I got to have lunch with the Archbishop of Canterbury at Lambeth. I got to work with wonderful people in Western North Carolina. But here's the thing. There's a quote I have on our refrigerator of St. Teresa, and this is what she says. You only have one life to live, which is short and must be lived by you alone. And there is only one glory, which is eternal. If you think about these things, there will be many things about which you care, nothing. At some point, I realized that my life was too short to spend it as the bishop. I had other things I wanted to do. And so I realized that I needed to grow in a different direction. And I still have a huge respect for my fellow bishops. But at some point, my wife and I had a serious conversation. And she said to me, sometimes I don't recognize who you are. Because you're not here, even when you're here. And that was a catalyst, I think, for changing. So I want to read a couple of things. I looked this morning, and Trinity Church actually appears. So if you happen to buy the book, it's on 15. If you don't buy the book, it's still on 15. I first thought about being a priest when I was 6 years old. My mother was on the altar guild at Trinity Church in Asheville, North Carolina. Saturday was her day to arrange the flowers on the altar and lay out the vessels, the silver chalice and plate and linens for the Sunday service. Because my father worked Saturday morning, sometimes my sister, brother, and I got dragged to church. In 1956, the sense of mystery in the church sanctuaries hadn't evaporated. Trinity Church was cool and dark on Saturdays. Sometimes I would sit in a pew about halfway down the aisle next to one of the massive stone pillars. I would watch the women quietly working, their heads illumined by the floodlights. The footsteps of the women around the altar echoed. I heard them whispering about their work. The altar was tan marble, a solid block, an anchor. As the women placed candles and white starched linens draped the chalice in stiff green cloth, the space went from stark to mysterious. One day when they were finished, I crept up the wooden rail in the front of the altar and knelt down. Even at 6, I felt displaced in my family, the only child with a strange name, Granville, and a sea of Richards and Sarahs. But in this place, I felt oddly safe and awed, less a sense of call and more a sense of belonging. I wanted to share a longer reading about the election of Catherine Jefferts Schori, and then if I have time, a shorter reading. And I wanted to do this because I was one of the bishops that, because I stuck around for a while, my class of bishops, we were designated for the people to count the ballots. So if you remember, Catherine Jefferts Schori was one of the nominees for the bishop, and the other person that was close to being elected was Henry Parsley from Alabama. And so there were 5 of us that were there to count the ballots. So I have to say, this is the 3rd time I've done this, and for no good reasons I choke up. I don't know why. So when I do, if y'all will just say loudly, man up. I mean, I wrote it. It's not like it's a surprise. So Catherine Jefferts Schori and Henry Parsley were the 2 that were neck and neck. By the second ballot, Henry and Catherine were tied. After we passed out the 3rd ballots, Nettie Ramirez was my best friend, Bishop of Spokane. Nettie and I stood in the back with the other 3 teller bishops in the front. Well, Nettie said, still think she can't win? I'm a believer, I said, and if she wins, I'll claim I voted for her on every ballot. If we do the right thing, we'll not only do good for the church, we'll also make history. I could feel the buzz as I took up the ballots. I noticed that many bishops had shifted seats. The diehard conservatives were clustered in the back. Some of the women had gathered in the middle right pews. Ballot number three, Catherine 68, Henry 63. We broke for lunch. After ballot number 4, one of the bishops whispered to me as we finished voting, "You won't believe this, but the arch conservatives are going to vote for Catherine. I grabbed his arm. That can't be true. Why would they do such a thing? A, they hate her, and they don't even believe in the ordination of women to the priesthood. Because they think it will sink the church, and then they can mop up. Wait, I said, grabbed his arm. How do you know this? Because he said, one of them showed me his ballot. I was reeling. As a bishop, I was privileged to meet people I never would have otherwise. Richard Rodriguez, Elizabeth Von Trott, Miroslav Volk, Desmond Tutu. And had opportunities to go to places which I just listed for you. But my naivete was gone. Martin Luther said, the church is the queen of heaven and the whore of Babylon. But I couldn't stand much more Babylon. If I was going to represent an institution, I needed to believe in it. It was okay to disagree, but to lie, do mischief. Let me skip a little bit. Thankfully, the task of counting cut my reverie short. The chancellor made us count ballot number 4 twice. Catherine 88, Henry 79, 95 to win. When Frank Griswold, sitting at the table in the front of the church, read the results, a buzz erupted, 7 votes short. I heard the bishop in front of me say to no one and to everyone, folks, do the math and you'll know what to do. The bishops were quieter than during the 5th vote. When we counters gathered in the room, Ken Price said, if there's a winner, we're going to count these ballots 3 times. I read the names slower than before. Our routine somehow took on a formality that was not there before. Ambrose Gums, Bishop of Virgin Islands, smoothed the ballots as if they were artifacts. The presiding bishop's chancellor stood behind Nettie and Jim Mathis to check their tallies. When the stack was almost done, I heard Nettie suck in air. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Is there an election? Ken Price asked in a kind of sergeant-at-arms voice. Jim Mathis said, Catherine Jefferts Shorey has the required, I don't know what that is, has the required 95 votes. We have an election. Whoa! That's what I heard myself say, louder. Whoa! Nettie was shaking. Tears ran down her face. We looked at one another as if we discovered an ocean or a new continent. I came to General Convention because as a bishop, I had to. But to my astonishment, we made history. The only part of the Anglican communion with a woman in charge. Catherine won on 95 votes, not a vote extra. Henry Parsley got 82, 13 believers short. Ken Price said, Bishop Taylor, as a senior bishop in the room, you are to walk to the presiding bishop's table and announce there is an election and hand him the result sheet. His voice grew lower and louder. None of you are to make any demonstration or indication in any way. Is that clear? We nodded like school children. Let's all just stare at the floor as we walk in the room, I said. It'll be better. As we stood, I grabbed Nettie's hand and squeezed it. I still couldn't do better than, whoa. As I walked down the stairs, I realized I felt hopeful about the church as an institution for the first time in at least a year. I had grown jaded and weary of all the maneuvering over who could gain the Archbishop of Canterbury's favor, or which dioceses were withholding money from the national church. I was tired of arguing and spending days and weeks in windowless banquet rooms to vote on things that would not change anything except inflate more egos. I hated representing a country club male church. My son was dating a seminarian in New York. Would I visit, she asked me. When I did visit her, she said, are we going to get rid of having to call God a man this year? Don't give up hope, I'd say, but sometimes I had. The church machine had ground me down. I came back to the church at 29 because I felt a connection to the source. Something opened up in me when I stood around the altar. At 6:30 on Friday morning and ate the bread of heaven. This was in Atlanta. I wept because I didn't know how dead I was until I came alive. But being a bishop was taking away the life force because every piece of paper I touched was seldom about the radical grace of God and more about the church machine. I'd lost a sense of horizon. Here I was at 56 thinking about my pension and when I could do what I wanted to do, preach and pray and teach and pastor. I wanted to discover the holy with people who wanted to go deeper into things that mattered, like wonder and pain and birth, death. Catherine's election made my pulse race and my heart pound and my throat choke up. When we walked into the church, the crowd quieted and the bishops in the aisle hurried to their seats. I walked to where the presiding bishop sat and held a paper to him as if it were the Magna Carta. I leaned over and said in a hushed voice, just loud enough for him to hear, there is an election. I thought, this is really the presiding bishop's moment, not mine. Bishop Griswold sat up straighter and said in a voice lower than usual, there is an election. Let me remind bishops there is to be no cheering. We thank those who offer themselves for the election for their willingness to serve and be vulnerable in such a public way. I lost Nettie, but found a seat next to the Bishop of Indianapolis. She and I became friends because we were both yellow Democrats. Her blonde hair gave her sort of a Meryl Streep look. Frank Griswold read the results in ascending order. No one had double digits until he got to Henry. Henry Parsley, 82 votes. He paused. 95 votes are required for election. Catherine Jefferts Shorey, 95 votes. There was a quiet moment when the world stopped turning. No movement, no sound, just a pause between the old order and the new, and then the hall erupted. Most of the bishops stood and cheered. Kate Wayne, the person I was standing next to, reached a few in front of us and grabbed the Bishop of Utah, Kelly Irish, in a fierce hug. They both wept and laughed at the same time. I looked for Catherine and finally spotted her in the middle aisle. Her hands were over her mouth. Tears streamed down her face. A gravitational force brought the other 11 women bishops to her as they formed a circle with her in the middle aisle. Their arms around one another's shoulders. They jumped up and down the way school children do when their energy overpowers their bodies. They were laughing and they were crying. When I looked in the back of the hall, I could see the conservative bishop wheeling himself out, even though we were told we could not leave the hall. Then the women scattered for a moment and moved to the front table where Frank Griswold had been sitting. They had their books. When we got there, the dean of the cathedral said it's our 100th anniversary for the cathedral. And he gave us these huge books called Be It Remembered. And I was thinking, oh crap, this is another thing I have to put in my suitcase and take home. But they had their books, Be It Remembered, in their hand, and Catherine started signing. Like slow learners, the men bishops queued up. I reached into my tote bag and waited my turn. Catherine Jefferts Shorey, 6/1806, she wrote. Frank Griswold called us together by getting the organist to play the church's one foundation. He asked Catherine to speak, but she couldn't begin. She opened her mouth, but no words could come out. Finally, she said something about being honored and humbled and the ministry of reconciliation, but she could have read the phone book and we would have cheered. I'm going to skip a little bit. She goes to the convention hall where the deputies were. For a moment, I thought about going in the hall, but I couldn't hold anymore. Instead, I walked outside the convention hall through the sparsely populated streets of Columbus. It was a summer day with a slight wind. I found myself at Goodale Park, a short distance from the hall. I walked around the lake. The swans swam in large circles with only the shortest ripple trailing behind them. Across the lake, children rushed down the slide or moved in rhythm on the swings. I could hear traces of their laughter. The trees rustled. For the first time in a long time, I thought about going back to the diocese and work, and my step quickened. So that's the Catherine chapter. And I have to say it was a changing point in everyone's life, church's life. Yeah, I also write about Michael Curry's election, which was very different. And I was a priest from the Diocese of Atlanta that was at the convention that affirmed the election of Gene Robinson to be the Bishop of New Hampshire. That was my first and last general convention as a priest. And when I came home, I said to Joe, my wife, I'm never doing that again. But God in God's humor said, well, every time there's a general convention, you'll be there. And so I didn't go to the last, and I said, thank you, Jesus. And then it turned out the next we're going to elect a new presiding bishop, and all bishops have a vote, and if retired bishops don't show up, there's not a quorum. So I will go to the next general convention. Just see where we are. Let me just read. If you only remember anything, I think the best part is the very end. What I have learned is this: our lives are short. My time as a bishop was the blink of an eye. My regret is not saying more about things that matter, like social justice, like the wideness of God's mercy, like our common need for confession, forgiveness, and repentance, like our calling to be present in the world's joys and sorrows. I regret wasting so much time being the mayor or the police or the judge or not being a simple God lover. But my regrets are much smaller than my thanksgivings for the privilege of being part of major transitions in people's lives. My greatest appreciation is through the rough and tumble of the episcopacy, some of my defenses got shaved down. Through my many internal and sometimes external struggles, I remembered what mattered and what didn't. If your need is to be liked, being a bishop was a perfect antidote because the purple shirt is a magnet for projections. My thanks is not for the pain that caused, but for the transformation that evoked. At the end, this is the important part. At the end, all we have is the love of God. And at the beginning, all we have is the love of God. And what we have to learn, and what I learned, or God forget, is that all the time when we're in our I am important, or simply to close and say, here I am, the clod of dirt God created, all we have is the love of God. What I have learned, albeit not quickly or easily, is that's enough. So I'll be glad we're okay.
Yeah.
I'll be glad to answer any questions or you can,
What's the meaning of the title of your book?
everyone asks me that.
Set up question.
I was trying to read it and the title line, I couldn't see it.
It's not as mysterious as you think it is.
What is the title?
Oh, it's, are you persuaded in and out of being a bishop? And the only place this happens in the prayer book is in the ordination of a bishop. And in the vow, at the very front part of the service, whoever the bishop is that's presiding says to the candidate, are you persuaded you were called to this office? And so I was persuaded and then I became unpersuaded. But it is a little esoteric, I'll admit that. Yeah. What else? What do you think? Yes.
Yeah, is the, the national church, the bigger operation. Are they providing pastoral care for the seated bishop? Is there anyone you could have gone to within the institution? Officially, unofficially?
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things. One is, so we have a House of Bishops meeting twice a year, and there are always chaplains there. And frankly, that's the only person I could ever figure out to say my confession to. And they are available to you all the time. The other thing is that, we are divided into provinces. And so the people you see we're in province 4, the people you see are other fellow bishops. And so Dabney Smith, who just resigned from Central Florida, from whatever that side of Florida is named, I don't think it's Central, it's wherever Tampa is. But he and I were like this, and so you do, and then the other thing is that surprisingly enough, Catherine Jeffrey Shorey is a wonderful pastor. I mean, there were times when I was like, I don't know what in the world I'm doing. I would have to, admittedly, she's busy, so I'd have to call her secretary and say, I need to talk to Bishop Catherine. She was always there. But I will say, you have to have a therapist, you have to have a spiritual director, you have to have a dog.
You are very good writer. You should consider.
As an English major, so. Oh, thank you.
It's very much by your description of experiencing presence and how that grew you into really what for many would be a remarkable leap. I mean, to go from presence to ministry is a huge leap. Very brave. And then I thought, from what I was reading, that you interpreted becoming a bishop as a way of having kind of more influence, more reach. And of course, the opposite happens. Very. And so my question, really the question there, have you been able to experience presence again since part of the bishop?
Yes, but I would say that, maybe I didn't write enough about preserving my interior life as the bishop. I mean, do you have to be intentional about that? Absolutely. But, this is still true. I have a therapist, I have a spiritual director, I go to retreat every year. I mean, there are things that there are things that you need to process that you cannot process with the institution. You know, but the other thing I just say is that I hired Jim Pritchett, and when I interviewed him, he said, "What's the bottom line?" And I says, "The bottom line is we have to be friends." Because as the canon of the ordinary, you're the only person I can be candid with. So we have to be friends. So, and I relied on my fellow bishops a ton. I mean, I would call Dabney Smith all the time. Honestly, I think it's less about the office and more just about my personality. It's not accidental that after 12 years of being the bishop, I went back to teaching. But I would also say I am hugely grateful for this because it stretched me in ways that I never would have stretched before.
Can you say more about your experience of transitioning from retirement as a bishop into life as a pastor?
Sure. First of all, I think I mentioned this, but my wife and I had a come to Jesus moment where she said, "You may not know you're done, but you're done." And she said, "I never see you, and when I do see you, you're not present, you're totally distracted." And so I knew I wanted to get back into teaching. So one of the members of your congregation called me and said, "You need to talk to Gail O'Day." Thank you, Ralph. And so I called her and she said, "I'm going to be in Asheville next week." And so we met at a coffee place downtown. And I said, "I need to go back to teaching." And she said, "I need someone to start a program for Episcopal candidates." And I was like, done. I mean, we didn't sign anything, but she said, "Here's where you can start," and blah, blah, blah. And so it was wonderful. It was total grace. So I taught at Wake for 3 years. It was just splendid. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
It did. I wonder, what did you learn about yourself? After being a bishop, placing yourself in that kind of ministry.
What I learned about myself is that what I learned about myself is that sometimes I have trouble representing an institution. And that was often difficult. And the other thing is, how do I put this so I don't sound overly saintly? I have never been a good disciplinarian. I wasn't good as a teacher. If you're an Enneagram person, I'm number 2 on the Enneagram. I want people to like me. And that part of the job was extremely difficult for me. But the other thing I learned, which I think is important, is that, again, I use this metaphor, the way we grow is to use your non-dominant hand. My faith quadrupled as being the bishop, because almost every day I'd say, "Dear God, I have no idea what I'm doing. It'd be nice if you show up." I mean, seriously, it was like people would ask me these things and I'd go, "Why are you asking me?" You know, "Oh, I got this purple shirt on. That's why you're asking me." You know. So I think that it's like we grow in our skill set, and then we grow in our awareness of who we are and who we're called to be. Anything else?
I ask something?
Yeah.
I'm curious your reflection on the current House of Bishops, so to say. On one hand, nearly getting close to half are female now.
Yeah.
And yet on the other hand, a growing number of people are being elected bishop who've never done clergy. And it's just very curious.
Yeah, I have to say, I haven't been to a House of Bishops meeting in I don't know how many years.
Yeah.
So, but you know, the other thing to say is that we're just in a different time period. And Michael Curry has been a very different leader, a wonderful leader. And I don't think it's accidental that we elect Catherine Jefferts Schori, we elect Michael Curry, and suddenly that allows is not the right word, that encourages people to think wider than just getting more, you know, stiff white men to be the bishops. So I think that's been healthy. But, you know, Scott, since I haven't been part of the sausage machine, I can't really tell you, you know, how that manifests. Anything else?
I've got another one. What do you think we need next? In a broad. Not a name, I don't mean that, but just.
Skills.
I think that our calling in sort of this order is to go deeper. You know, I mean, one of the things that always concerned me about my fellow bishops is are you cultivating your connection with the holy? Or have you become a bureaucrat? So that's the first thing. And, you know, I think we have to go deep before we can go out, or our egos just get in the way. I think that's a huge thing. I think the other thing is we are trying to figure out, and Catherine and Michael have been very helpful with this, but we're still trying to figure out how does the church prophesy to the world? What does that look like? What does it mean to be prophets in this day and time? And how do we do that without just getting automatically trapped in the war of Republicans and Democrats that's going? But I think I think people are eager to hear a message of hope that's grounded sort of in what are the issues, how do we apply that in the issues that we're facing right now? And then the third thing is, I still think as much as it's been helpful to have all this way of communication, I still think people have no idea about what goes on in the House of Bishops. And I have argued for decades that why can't we live stream everything but the business meeting? And yet that doesn't happen. In my mind, they're public meetings, you know. So I realize there's part of the meeting that you can't do when you're going to discipline someone, or, you know, but why not live stream them? But I didn't get very far. Yeah. I do want to sell some books. Well, we could do that after church. That'd be good.
We can do it now and after church.
I do want to say, so what happened is I couldn't find a publisher. We could talk about church publishing, but I don't want to. So I got Whippenstock has 5 different labels. That's not the right word, but anyway. So they published the book for me. They send it out, but I've found that I've sold most of the books. I think. I mean, it's on Amazon. You'll get it cheaper from me than Amazon. It's on Amazon. But I never know how many books to have. So sometimes I go to these places and I sell one book, and sometimes I'll sell more than one book. So I'm sort of between shipments, because I'm gonna talk at the North Carolina clergy retreat. I'm hoping that they'll buy books. So the point is, I have some books, they're $20. I also have a little gizmo that will take credit cards. And if you don't have a book, you can go order them at Amazon, or you can email me and I'll figure out how to get you a book.
So friends, we have 15 minutes before Bishop Taylor needs to prepare for first. So feel free to ask more questions or come up to him and purchase a book. And if there's any left, we'll do the same for church.
So if you want to contact me, it's pretty simple, lowercase, PorterTaylor80@gmail.com. Just remember 80 and you'll be fine.